magnetize your minis, flight stands, custom kits, and all the hobby supplies you'll need from themagnetbaron.com.
Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for craftworldeldar.com. I'm Brent and this is the unit focus video on Shadow Spectres. In these unit focus videos I talk about what the unit is, its role on the table, obstacles to using it effectively, and how to play around those obstacles. Now, Shadow Spectres are the Forge World Aspect Warrior option. So if you're looking for rules for Shadow Spectres and you just were to click on in the 40k app Index Eldari, you would not see them. You have to click on Imperial Armor Eldari, which is sort of silly, or just go into Battleforge, and if you select them for your list, you can see their data sheets. Shadow Spectres are spooky, floaty, hit and spook off aspect warriors that are kind of skirmishing units. They're sort of snipers that like shoot and move. And I personally think that Shadow Spectres are contenders for certainly first equal best aspect warriors currently in the game for Eldar. Fire Dragons are very good. Both Hawks and Spiders are very good as scoring units. But Shadow Spectres are powerful includes because they do it all. They're an excellent target elimination unit into light infantry. They're an excellent target elimination unit into heavy infantry. They're a good target elimination unit into light vehicles. They can do some damage to heavy vehicles. And they're highly survivable because they battle focus natively. You may, if you're a former 9th edition player, you remember battle focus after they shoot. They can make a 6-inch move, and with a decent range on their weapon, it means that they're relatively easy to keep alive. This is particularly valuable now that Phantasm has been nerfed to not only affect infantry, but only allow an infantry unit to move d6. So Shadow Spectres can always move 6 inches after they fire, which also increases their potential movement range from 12 to 18. So they're exceptional at, they're very good at killing stuff and then staying alive to kill stuff again. But also, at only 95 points for the most basic version of the unit, they're sufficiently efficiently pointed that if you had to trade them, you could, but also you can have them do actions. They're pretty fast, so they can float off to help you get engaged on all fronts, or to perform an action in some corner of the board, or do something. In terms of cost, they're in between Swooping Hawks and Warp Spiders, both of which are just predominantly scoring units. So the fact that Shadow Spectres can not only be a scoring unit if you need them to, but really their primary role is as killers, as target elimination. They're very good at that. They also have Deep Strike natively, and also have Stealth, so they're -1 to hit. That doesn't like make them durable or anything. Despite having a 3-up save, they're still T3 elves with 1 wound, so they're not exactly robust against target elimination units. But they're a little bit more durable than your average aspect warrior, and they are faster than your average aspect warrior, and they are good at killing stuff, and they are efficiently pointed, and they can score. So they're valuable tools. They appear in a lot of highly competitive GT lists, I think, for this reason. They do many things. They're not auto-includes. Well, for me, in my lists, they are. But if you look at the lists that podium at GTs, they're not auto-includes, but they're a very common tournament pick. It's a very strong unit, and it's a unit that's going to be effective in any meta. It doesn't really depend on what your opponent's running. Shadow Spectres are always good. They are, however, unfortunately, sometimes a bit difficult to get a hold of. They're not always in production, and they often come at a premium on eBay, which is kind of a bummer. But if you do have them, or you can get your hands on some, they're a lot of fun in lists. They're a toolbox unit, and they're just very Eldari in their play style. They're a sneaky duck and covered unit that rewards cleverness and can also help you score. Okay, let's take a closer look at the data sheet. So they've got natively the 12-inch move, the toughness 3, the 3-up save, the 1 wound, the leadership 6, the 1 OC. Pretty standard with the exception of the slightly better armor than some aspects. And of course, they move. They have the 5-up invuln save. And then for their ranged weapon, they all come with a prism rifle. So the prism rifle is the infantry version of the weapon that's on the fire prisms. So it has two profiles, a dispersed profile and a focused profile. The dispersed profile is the anti-light infantry profile, and it's freaking awesome. It has an 18-inch range, D6 shots blast, and because it's all 5 models with blast, then you just keep adding that multiple times. So if, for example, you're playing into a Tyranid horde list and there's a unit of 20 termagants and you target it with your Shadow Spectres, well, each individual Spectre is getting an additional 4 shots. So you'd be getting 5d6 times 20 shots, which is amazing. Hitting on 3s, strength 4, -1, flat 1 damage. It's just great volume of fire. If you could use it against heavy infantry also, and into something like a unit of Space Marines out in the open, particularly if there were 10 Marines and you could be triggering blast 2 with each Spectre, you might actually be better off just using the dispersed profile. But you also have access to the focused profile, and this is the one I find myself using a little bit more often. It has a 24-inch range, 1 shot only, but of course, if you're weapons that hit harder are more benefited by our detachment bonus, the reroll to hit and the reroll to wound. Hitting on 3s, strength 6, excellent, -2 AP, very good, and then flat 3 damage. I love flat 3 damage. Flat 3 damage is one of my favorite flat damages, in part because there are all of these models running around in the game with 3 wounds, and many of these are pretty popular right now. So Terminators, right? Or Chaos Space Marine Chosen, or some bikes have 3 wounds. The ability to just do flat 3 wounds. It's also efficient into 6 wound light vehicles, like, for example, our Vipers. If you just can cleanly kill something with 2 failed saves, that's very, very good. And the 24-inch range also allows the Shadow Spectres to stay a bit further away from the opponent's models, which you want because they're not robust in melee. So you have these 2 very good shooting profiles, and then you also have to keep in mind that because they can battle focus after you fire with them, they probably get to shoot multiple rounds, right? It's hard to they're hard to kill if they're well positioned, so they're going to participate in the battle and be able to lean into these profiles multiple times. That's really good shooting. Their melee has nothing to recommend it. I'm not going to talk about it. It's standard. Although you don't have any control over their loadout, you do have an interesting decision to make when assembling a squad of Shadow Spectres that's a bit different from the usual, and that is that instead of just coming in either as a 5 or a 10 elf squad, they either come as a 5 elf squad with no Exarch, or a 5 elf squad with an Exarch, or a 10 elf squad with an Exarch, or a 10 elf squad with no Exarch. Now, I think this is simply because of how they're sold, because it's a Forge World model. The box of 5 Shadow Spectres has no build option for an Exarch. The Exarch is sold as a separate model. But then, curiously, this is the only aspect where the Exarch has no abilities that the regular Shadow Spectres don't have, and carries exactly the same weapon as the other aspect warriors in the unit. The only distinction between a Shadow Spectre Exarch and a regular Shadow Spectre is the number of wounds, which, frankly, lore-wise, really doesn't make any sense at all. Exarchs are supposed to be exemplars of the shrine, who therefore are able to use some special weapon that the others haven't figured out yet, mastered, or do something. Shadow Spectre Exarchs just are another Shadow Spectre with an extra wound. So generally you always put the first wound on this guy unless the first thing that hits the squad does flat 2 damage. It's 30 points to add the Exarch. If I have a list where I have 11 Shadow Spectres, a squad of 5 and a squad of 6, and it's just because I ended up with 30 points left, and I'd already taken the Phoenix Gem. There wasn't an enhancement that I needed, so I added a Shadow Spectre Exarch. There are people who have like done the math to work out into ideal targets in your meta. Is it worth it to have 6 of these instead of 5 of these if it means you can eliminate a particular enemy squad that's very meta without having to target it again? I honestly can't really speak to the math of this. In general, I think it's fine to simply run them as MSU units because they're also scoring units, and when they're scoring units, it doesn't matter if you have an extra Spectre, and you are likely to need those 30 points elsewhere. For example, that is the amount of points more that a Night Spinner costs since the nerf. But whatever. If you have the points, you may want to add the Exarch in. I definitely think you're better off running these things in 5s rather than big squads, for the simple reason that if you have 10 Shadow Spectres and you're going to run 2 squads of 5, they're just more maneuverable. They're easier to hide. They can more easily make use of terrain and cover when they're using their Shade of Twilight, Floaty McFloaterson ability. And then also, obviously, if you have 2 smaller squads, you benefit more from the detachment ability for the rerolls. And so even though it's not like you're getting a second Exarch weapon or something because they don't have them, it just has better math. And there isn't really a buff that you're going to throw on them that they're going to need, such that you're going to want them to be in one big unit. So I think when you're adding Shadow Spectres to a list, it's pretty straightforward. You put in units of 5, and if you have some points left over at the end, you could always add an Exarch to one of those squads. Now, how you're actually going to play with these things on the table is really going to depend on what your opponent has brought, because they are target elimination units first and foremost. So step 1 is deciding whether or not you're going to put them into Deep Strike to use their native Deep Strike ability. So in order to determine this, you look at your opponent's list and you ask yourself, is this a very forward list that's going to be in the middle of the table on turn 1? Or is this a list that I will need to move aggressively to engage? If this is a list that you need to move aggressively to engage because it's a Tau gun line or something, you probably want to start the Shadow Spectres in Deep Strike. The range on the Prism Rifle, while not bad at 18 and 24, depending on which profile you choose, is certainly not extraordinary. And so it will probably be easier and safer and require less planning to simply bring them in 12 inches or 15 inches or 16 inches from an opponent in a place where they can easily duck behind terrain. Because again, unlike in the previous edition, Shadow Spectres can do that battle focusy move after shooting when they come in out of Deep Strike. That's pretty powerful. The other possibility is you look at your opponent's list and you see that it's just going to go for the middle of the table on turn 1. Maybe it's a Chaos Space Marine list. Maybe it's a Tyranid list. Maybe it's an aggressive Necron list with tons of infantry. Whatever the case, you will probably find that in lots and lots of games, you're better off just starting the Shadow Spectres on the table, because if they can shoot turn 1, they probably should. The easiest way to make use of the battle focus ability in those scenarios is to have them move through the opaque wall of the building because they are infantry, and then Twilight, battle focusy, Shade of Twilight, whatever, back through the wall of the building to be out of line of sight and completely safe. And this can provide the extra firepower that you need to prevent your opponent from really pressing into the center of the table. And then as the game progresses, the Spectres can become more aggressive and start moving out into the midfield and using their shoot and move ability to potentially blast an enemy unit off of an objective and then move on to the objective. That one is a particularly good trick. Or to blast an enemy unit and then drift out of line of sight into a table quarter to help you get engaged on all fronts, or some other location-based scoring secondary. Okay, obstacles to using Spectres effectively. There's really only one, and that is their relative fragility. If you have them in cover, they will do okay against basic small arms fire. like against something with -1 AP that's -1 to hit, so only half of the shots are hitting, and then they're still saving on a 3-up. It's not terrible if they expose themselves to like a unit of Space Marines, a small unit of Space Marines that take some pot shots with bolters or something. But they will just die to anything with decent dedicated fire. So just be smart about knowing where your opponent's units can be, how far they can move, and then they're incredibly easy to kill in melee. Just incredibly easy to kill in melee. So don't get caught flat-footed. They're cheap enough that if you really needed to trade them to move block something or to get a beat on something where you weren't able to then drift away, it's kind of okay. But you want that to be a choice, not a mistake if that happens. Really, anytime you're playing Eldar, though, the single biggest consideration with reference to knowing stuff about your opponent's list is knowing which units are fast and which units can be fast, because you need to outmaneuver your opponent. That's just part of being a space elf, is not getting caught flat-footed. Even these days, when we've got stuff like the Avatar of Cain or the Yinkarn or Wraithguard in our list, still most of the stuff in an Eldari list is pretty squishy. So you need to know what can get a beat on you, and Shadow Spectres are a prime example of that. But they really don't have any special weaknesses or vulnerabilities. There's not some particular play error that you're likely to make with them. They're just a very solid unit with a built-in, doesn't cost you a command point, very Eldari trick that you are never going to be sorry that you have in your list. This is just it's a great addition to a collection. The models are cool. And again, I think especially since the nerf to Phantasm, I think that I think Shadow Spectres are one of the best units in the index at the moment. Oh, lastly, something that I like to use them for, if you're playing into an enemy list that's highly maneuverable and has a lot of deep strikers of its own, Shadow Spectres are a great answer to something like Drakari Scourges, right? If your opponent starts their Drakari Scourges in Deep Strike, you start your Shadow Spectres in Deep Strike, and you can trade them. Every time the Scourges come out, you bring some Shadow Spectres out, you kill the Scourges, you move. Maybe you're even able to survive, right? You move into cover, but they can be good for taking away the tools that your opponent has that are the most effective tools for dealing with Eldar. So that's what I've got. Not a ton to say. No particularly clever and unusual tricks. This is just a solid unit that if you're not thinking about, if you're not playing with, maybe it should be on your radar. If you have your own ideas about how to use Shadow Spectres effectively, please leave those in the comments below. If you would just like to say hi, I hope that you will say hi. And should you be feeling simply downright generous, you could always become a patron and join my Discord, where the banter is cheerful and the insights are compelling. All right, back again soon with something new. Thanks. Take care.